At 2100 hours on October 24, 1942, Sergeant John Basilone checked the ammunition supply for his two Browning M1917 machine gun crews on Guadalcanal. 1,400 rounds per gun, enough for maybe 20 minutes of sustained combat. His commanding officer had told him to expect light probing attacks through the night, maybe some grenades, maybe a small infantry push. Nothing the machine guns couldn't handle. What neither Basilone nor his commanding officer knew was that in the jungle darkness 200 yards away, 3,000 Japanese soldiers from the 29th Infantry Regiment were fixing bayonets and preparing for a massive human wave assault designed to overwhelm the Marine defensive positions and retake Henderson Field. The Japanese commander had ordered his men to break through at any cost. Casualties were irrelevant. Henderson Field had to be captured before dawn. Basilone was 26 years old. He had enlisted in the Army at 18, served 3 years in the Philippines, been discharged, worked as a truck driver in New Jersey, gotten bored, and re-enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1940. He was a former boxer with a reputation for being tough, competent, and impossible to rattle. His men trusted him. His officers respected him. But nobody, including Basilone himself, was prepared for what was about to happen in the next 48 hours. If you want to see how one Marine sergeant held off an entire Japanese regiment with just machine guns and burned hands, hit that like button right now. It tells us you want more forgotten stories from the Pacific War. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below about what WWII battle we should cover next. Now, back to Guadalcanal, October 24, 1942, where John Basilone was about to fight the longest night of his life.
At 21:30 hours, Basilone heard movement in the jungle. Not the normal sounds of nocturnal animals or wind through the palm trees. This was different. Organized, deliberate. The sound of hundreds of men moving through vegetation, trying to stay quiet. He alerted his two machine gun crews. Corporal Lee Diamond was on the left gun, 15 yards away. Private First Class Nash Phillips was on the right gun, another 15 yards in the opposite direction. Between them, they had a 25-yard section of defensive perimeter to hold. Behind them was the rest of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. In front of them was jungle, darkness, and whatever was making that sound. The Japanese attacked at 2200 hours. Not with a cautious probe, not with a small scouting force. With everything. 3,000 men screaming "Banzai" and charging through the jungle with fixed bayonets, grenades, and an absolute conviction that they would break through the Marine lines or die trying. Basilone opened fire first. The M1917 Browning heavy machine gun was a beast of a weapon. 41 pounds of steel and wood, water-cooled barrel, belt-fed .30-06 ammunition. Rate of fire around 450 rounds per minute. Designed in World War I, still devastating in World War II. The weapon could fire continuously for minutes, as long as you kept the water jacket filled and the ammunition belt feeding. The jungle erupted in muzzle flashes. Basilone's gun roared to life, cutting down the first wave of Japanese soldiers at 50 yards. Diamond's gun on the left opened fire simultaneously. Phillips's gun on the right joined seconds later. 3 M1917s, putting out a combined 1,350 rounds per minute, created an interlocking field of fire that nothing human could advance through. The first wave died in the jungle. 40, maybe 50 Japanese soldiers cut down before they reached the Marine positions. But the attack didn't stop. The second wave was already charging through the bodies of the first. Japanese doctrine was overwhelming firepower with numbers. If 50 men died, send 100 more. If 100 died, send 200. Eventually, the defenders would run out of ammunition or break psychologically. But John Basilone wasn't breaking. He fired controlled bursts, 10 to 15 rounds at a time, walking his fire across groups of enemy soldiers advancing through the jungle. The M1917's water-cooled barrel meant he didn't have to worry about overheating like the lighter air-cooled machine guns. As long as the water jacket stayed filled and the ammunition kept feeding, the weapon would fire indefinitely. The second wave died like the first. The third wave came 5 minutes later. By 22:30 hours, Basilone estimated his crew had fired over 600 rounds. The ammunition belts were disappearing fast. At this rate of expenditure, they would run dry in less than 30 minutes, and the Japanese were still coming. He could hear officers shouting orders in the darkness. He could hear the metallic sounds of rifle bolts cycling and grenades being armed. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were regrouping for another assault. At 22:45, Diamond's gun on the left went silent. Not jammed, not out of ammunition. The entire crew was dead. A Japanese grenade had landed directly in the gun pit, killing Diamond and his assistant gunner instantly. The gun itself was damaged, but potentially salvageable. But that left a 15-yard gap in the Marine defensive line that the Japanese could exploit. Basilone made his decision in seconds. He grabbed 2 ammunition belts, 90 pounds of linked .30-06 rounds draped across his shoulders and chest, and ran toward Diamond's position, 15 yards through jungle darkness, while Japanese soldiers were advancing from the opposite direction. He covered the distance in 8 seconds, dove into the gun pit, and found both Marines dead and the weapon damaged. The M1917's tripod was bent from the grenade blast. The water jacket was punctured and leaking, but the firing mechanism looked intact. Basilone worked fast. He straightened the tripod legs using his boot for leverage. He ignored the leaking water jacket because the gun would overheat eventually anyway. He loaded a fresh ammunition belt, cycled the action manually, and the weapon fired. He was now operating 2 machine guns by himself. His primary weapon 15 yards to the right, manned by Phillips. Diamond's gun in his current position. He would have to run back and forth between them to keep both operational. That meant crossing 15 yards of open ground repeatedly, while Japanese soldiers were throwing grenades and firing rifles from 30 yards away. The fourth wave hit at 2300 hours. Basilone fired Diamond's gun until the belt ran empty, then sprinted back to his primary position to check on Phillips. The younger Marine was still alive, but had taken shrapnel to the left arm from a grenade. He could still fire the gun, but couldn't reload effectively with one functioning arm. Basilone reloaded Phillips's weapon, fired a burst to suppress an advancing group of Japanese soldiers, then ran back to Diamond's position and reloaded that gun. He was operating on pure combat instinct now. Load, fire, run. Load, fire, run. The mathematics were simple but brutal. 2 guns, 1 operator, ammunition running out, enemy not stopping. By midnight, Basilone had fired over 2,000 rounds between both guns. The ammunition supply was critical. Each M1917 had maybe 200 rounds remaining. At the current rate of enemy attacks, that would last maybe 15 minutes. After that, the guns would be silent and the Japanese would break through. The ammunition resupply point was 200 yards behind the lines near the battalion command post. Basilone would have to leave both guns unmanned, run through jungle in total darkness, find the resupply point, load himself up with as much ammunition as he could carry, and run back. The entire trip would take maybe 10 minutes. 10 minutes where the defensive line would have no machine gun support. At 00:15 hours, Basilone told Phillips to hold position and started running. He moved through the jungle by memory and instinct. No flashlight, because that would draw enemy fire. No trail markings, because everything looked identical in darkness. Just dead reckoning and hope that he was heading in the right direction. He encountered a Japanese infiltration team 80 yards from his position. 3 enemy soldiers who had broken through a gap in the Marine lines and were moving toward the rear areas. They saw Basilone at the same moment he saw them. All 4 men went for their weapons simultaneously. Basilone was faster. His M1911 .45 caliber pistol cleared its holster and fired 3 times in 2 seconds. 2 Japanese soldiers dropped dead. The third charged him with a bayonet. Basilone sidestepped the thrust, grabbed the man's rifle barrel, and used his combat knife to kill him. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 seconds. He reached the ammunition resupply point at 00:20 hours. The supply sergeant stared at him like he was a ghost. Most Marines from the forward positions were either dead or pinned down.
Nobody was making resupply runs through enemy-held jungle in total darkness. Basilone didn't explain. He just started loading ammunition belts across his shoulders and chest. 90 pounds of linked .30-06 ammunition. 3 belts, each containing 250 rounds. Enough to keep both guns firing for maybe another 20 minutes if the Japanese attacks continued at the current intensity. Basilone also grabbed a spare M1917 barrel because he knew the guns were approaching their thermal limits and would need replacement soon. The return trip took 8 minutes. He moved faster because he knew the route now. He also knew that every second his guns were silent, the Japanese could be advancing. When he reached Phillips' position at 0028 hours, the young Marine was firing single shots with his M1911 pistol. The machine gun was empty, and 3 Japanese soldiers were dead in front of the gun pit, killed at point-blank range. Basilone loaded a fresh ammunition belt into Phillips's weapon and told him to keep firing. He then ran to Diamond's position and reloaded that gun. At 0030 hours, both M1917s were operational again, and the 5th Japanese wave was already forming in the darkness. The attacks continued through the night, wave after wave of Japanese soldiers charging the Marine positions with absolute disregard for casualties. The enemy doctrine was simple: overwhelm the defenders with numbers, make them shoot until their barrels melted and their ammunition ran out, then overrun their positions with bayonets. By 200 hours, Basilone had made 3 trips to the ammunition resupply point. Each time he encountered Japanese infiltrators. Each time he killed them with his pistol or knife. Each time he returned with 90 pounds of ammunition belts that kept his guns firing for another 20 minutes. But a new problem was developing. The machine guns were overheating. The M1917's water-cooled jacket was designed to prevent thermal damage, but continuous firing for 4 hours straight was pushing the weapons beyond their design specifications. The water in both jackets was boiling. Steam was venting from the fill caps. The barrels were starting to glow red in the darkness. At 0030 hours, Phillips's gun suffered a critical malfunction. The barrel had expanded from heat, and a cartridge case had ruptured inside the chamber. The weapon was jammed solid. In normal circumstances, you would let the barrel cool for 30 minutes, then carefully extract the stuck case with specialized tools. But Basilone didn't have 30 minutes. He didn't have 30 seconds. He grabbed the spare barrel he had brought from the resupply point. But there was a problem. Changing an M1917 barrel required removing the boiling water jacket first. The asbestos gloves they normally used for this procedure were back at the supply point because Basilone hadn't thought to bring them during his last ammunition run. The next Japanese wave was forming 40 yards away. He could see them massing in the darkness. He had maybe 20 seconds before they charged. Phillips's gun was inoperable. Diamond's gun was 15 yards away. If both positions weren't firing when the Japanese attacked, they would break through. John Basilone made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He grabbed the red-hot water jacket with his bare hands.
The pain was instantaneous and overwhelming. The water jacket's surface temperature was over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The metal seared through Basilone's skin in less than a second. He could smell his own flesh burning. His hands were literally cooking on the metal surface. But he didn't let go. He unscrewed the jacket using pure grip strength and will, feeling his palms blister and char. He removed the damaged barrel, installed the spare, refilled the water jacket from his canteen, and loaded a fresh ammunition belt. The entire barrel change procedure took 45 seconds. By the time he finished, the skin on both palms was blackened and peeling. He grabbed the machine gun's handles and opened fire. The pain was beyond anything he had experienced. Every time his burned hands gripped the weapon's handles, damaged nerve endings screamed. But the gun was firing again, and the advancing Japanese wave was being cut down. Phillips saw what Basilone had done and asked if he needed medical attention. Basilone told him to shut up and keep loading ammunition. There would be time for corpsmen later. Right now, the only thing that mattered was keeping both guns operational. For the next 4 hours, John Basilone continued operating 2 machine guns with hands that were burned to exposed tissue. Every trigger pull was agony. Every time he had to adjust the weapon's position or clear a jam, he was gripping hot metal with damaged flesh that had no protection left. Medical personnel who examined him after the battle said the pain should have been incapacitating. Basilone fired over 4,000 more rounds with those hands. At 0400 hours, he made his 4th ammunition resupply run. This time, he brought back asbestos gloves, but when he tried to put them on, his hands were so swollen and damaged that the gloves wouldn't fit. He threw them aside and continued operating the weapons bare-handed. The Japanese attacks were becoming more desperate. Their officers had committed over 2,000 soldiers to the assault, and casualties were catastrophic. But Japanese military doctrine in 1942 didn't allow for tactical retreat. The orders were simple: break through or die trying. So they kept attacking, and Basilone kept killing them. At 0430 hours, a Japanese soldier made it to within 5 feet of Basilone's position before being shot by Phillips. Another enemy soldier threw a grenade that landed inside Diamond's gun pit. Basilone picked it up with his burned hands and threw it back, where it exploded and killed 3 Japanese soldiers. By 0600 hours, dawn was breaking over Guadalcanal. The jungle became visible in the gray light, and what Basilone saw was carnage. Hundreds of Japanese bodies lay in front of his 2 machine gun positions. They were stacked in layers, where waves of attacks had been cut down on top of previous waves. The vegetation was shredded from machine gun fire. Empty ammunition belts lay scattered around both gun pits like metallic snakes. Phillips looked at Basilone's hands in the morning light and immediately called for a corpsman. The skin was gone. The flesh was burned black. In some places, you could see white bone beneath the charred tissue. Any normal man would have been in shock from pain and blood loss. Basilone was checking his machine guns to make sure they were still operational. The Japanese launched their final attack at 0620 hours. One last desperate push with maybe 200 soldiers, all that remained of the original 3,000-man regiment. They charged directly at Basilone's position, and he cut them down, with both machine guns firing simultaneously. He was running between positions, firing bursts, reloading, firing again, his burned hands leaving bloody smears on every surface he touched. The attack broke. The surviving Japanese soldiers retreated into the jungle. For the first time in 8 hours, the battlefield fell silent.
At 0700 hours, Basilone's battalion commander reached his position to assess the situation. He found 2 destroyed machine gun emplacements, held by 1 sergeant with catastrophic hand injuries and 1 private with a shrapnel wound. He also found 38 confirmed Japanese dead within 25 yards of the 2 gun pits, with hundreds more scattered throughout the surrounding jungle. The commander asked Basilone how he had held the position. Basilone said he just kept the guns firing. When the commander asked about his hands, Basilone said they hurt, but he could still shoot. When the commander ordered him to report to the battalion aid station, Basilone refused. His gun crews needed resupply, the weapons needed maintenance. The Japanese might attack again. It took a direct order from a major to get John Basilone to leave his machine guns. The battalion aid station's medical personnel were overwhelmed with casualties from the night's fighting, but when they saw Basilone's hands, they moved him to the front of the treatment line. The battalion surgeon later wrote in his report that the burns were 3rd degree, covering both palms and extending up the forearms. In some areas, the muscle tissue was exposed. The normal treatment would be immediate evacuation to a rear area hospital for skin grafts and months of recovery. Basilone asked how long treatment would take because he needed to get back to his unit. The surgeon told him he wasn't going back to any unit. He was going to a hospital ship. Basilone argued. The surgeon won, but only because Basilone passed out from blood loss and exhaustion before he could finish arguing. He woke up 12 hours later on a hospital ship anchored offshore. His hands were wrapped in bandages. An IV line was feeding him fluids and antibiotics. A Navy nurse told him he had third-degree burns, severe dehydration, and exhaustion. She also told him that according to reports from his battalion, he had personally killed at least 38 Japanese soldiers, held a critical defensive position against overwhelming odds, and kept 2 machine guns operational for 8 hours straight. Basilone asked when he could return to his unit. The nurse said not for several weeks at minimum. He would need surgery, physical therapy, and extensive recovery time before his hands would function normally again. Basilone told her that was unacceptable. She told him to take it up with the doctors. He did. They told him the same thing. On November 2, 1942, 9 days after the battle, Major General Alexander Vandegrift visited Basilone in the hospital ship. Vandegrift was the commander of the 1st Marine Division, and he had come to personally inform Sergeant John Basilone that he was being awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions during the battle for Henderson Field. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry in action against enemy Japanese forces above and beyond the call of duty, while serving with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, 1st Marine Division in the Lunga area, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, on October 24 and 25, 1942. While the enemy was hammering at the Marines' defensive positions, Sergeant Basilone, in charge of 2 sections of heavy machine guns, fought valiantly to check the savage and determined assault." Basilone would be the first enlisted Marine to receive the Medal of Honor in World War II. His actions that night at Guadalcanal would become legendary in Marine Corps history. The burned hands that should have ended his combat effectiveness became a symbol of his absolute refusal to quit under any circumstances. But what happened next would be equally important to understanding who John Basilone was.
After receiving the Medal of Honor, the Marine Corps wanted to bring Basilone home. They wanted to put him on war bond tours, use him for recruitment, make him the face of Marine Corps heroism. For a man who had nearly died holding a defensive position in the jungle, this should have been a perfect assignment. Safe, prestigious, important to the war effort. Basilone hated every second of it. He spent 1943 touring the United States, giving speeches, shaking hands, selling war bonds. He was good at it. He raised over $1.4 million for the war effort. But every day he spent on tour was a day he wasn't with his Marines in the Pacific. In July 1944, after 18 months of war bond tours, John Basilone requested reassignment to a combat unit. The Marine Corps refused. He was too valuable as a symbol. His death in combat would be devastating for morale. Better to keep him stateside, where he was safe and useful. Basilone kept requesting. He submitted formal transfer requests through his chain of command. When those were denied, he went directly to senior officers he had met during the war bond tours. He argued that he had trained his entire adult life to be a Marine, and Marines belonged in combat, not on stages selling bonds. In December 1944, his persistence paid off. He was assigned to the 5th Marine Division as a machine gun section leader and promoted to gunnery sergeant. His unit was preparing for a major amphibious assault somewhere in the Pacific. The target was classified, but everyone knew it would be ugly. On February 19, 1945, Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone hit the black volcanic beaches of Iwo Jima with Company C, 1st Battalion, 27th Marines, the same day Tony Stein landed with his improvised Stinger machine gun, the same day that would become the deadliest single day in Marine Corps history. Basilone's mission was to lead his machine gun teams off the beach and establish firing positions to support the infantry advance. But the Japanese had fortified Iwo Jima with 11 miles of interconnected tunnels and 22,000 defenders. Every meter of beach was pre-registered for mortar and artillery fire. Getting off that beach required speed, violence, and absolute disregard for personal safety. Basilone moved his teams forward through concentrated fire. He personally destroyed a Japanese pillbox by maneuvering around its position and attacking from the flank with grenades and demolition charges. He guided a tank through a minefield, clearing the way for infantry to advance. For 3 hours, he was everywhere the fighting was heaviest, directing fire, destroying enemy positions, keeping his Marines moving forward. At approximately 10:30 hours, a Japanese mortar barrage hit Basilone's position near the base of Mount Suribachi. Multiple rounds landed in rapid succession. John Basilone was killed instantly. He was 28 years old. He had survived Guadalcanal against 3,000 Japanese soldiers. He had survived the impossible machine gun stand with burned hands. He had survived the war bond tours and fought his way back to combat. And he died on a volcanic beach in the first hours of a battle that would rage for 35 more days. For his actions on Iwo Jima, Basilone was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in the U.S. military. He remains the only enlisted Marine in World War II to receive the Medal of Honor and a Navy Cross. The machine gun tactics Basilone demonstrated at Guadalcanal, sustained suppressive fire, aggressive ammunition resupply, refusing to abandon defensive positions even when wounded, became core doctrine in Marine Corps training. The burned hands that should have ended his combat effectiveness became a legend that new Marines still hear about in machine gun school. John Basilone proved that sometimes the difference between a defensive line holding and breaking isn't about firepower or tactics. It's about one man who understands his weapon, understands his mission, and refuses to quit regardless of pain, exhaustion, or impossible odds. And that principle remains true in every military organization to this day.